Rosa and I, in the spring of last year, did kind of a parent 101 about, trying to help manage and provide tools for children with anxiety. So today we were supposed to begin our presentation with a visual and an auditory kind of feedback experience where you would have seen a variety of nature scenes and music that is very calming, and that the purpose of that was to really have an opportunity, as we would kind of be rushing in from our hectic days, to see how sound and visual images can really calm us and move us from what could be somewhat of an experience of frustration or anxiety to a sense of calmness. And that by manipulating our environments, not only for ourselves but for our children, we can attain that same experience. So with that said, sit back and relax our presentation.
I'm not sure if any of you know who Corrie ten Boom is. Her and her family opened up their home and hid Jews during World War II. And she has a great quote here, and it says, "Worrying is carrying tomorrow's load with today's strength, carrying 2 days at once. It is moving into tomorrow ahead of time. Worrying doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrow, it just empties today of its strength." So think about worrying. Think about you as an adult, and then think about your children. When you're worrying about things that happened in the future, or that are going to happen in the future. What ifs, right? Things that happened in the past. All right? Our kids are, and you are not in the present moment when you are worrying. This is going to be fun. Do you want to do next one? Yeah, there you go.
Okay, great. All right. So, Rosa and I were kind of chuckling, but a little bit tongue-in-cheek about some of these telltale signs that you're parenting an anxious child. So, the first kind of indication is that when your purse is armed with a full medical bag, change of clothes, and a portal to escape only unbearable situations. Any unbearable situations. Your heart stops and palpitates, your hands get clammy when you have to tell your child it's time to go. A visit to the bathroom becomes a family affair. You have 80 different styles of ice packs in your freezer and 15 different boxes of bandages. Sleeping is a family contact sport.
Your child is more worried about being on time than you are. Your bedtime routine is longer than some novels. And you screen movies like Finding Nemo for disturbing scenes that will cause your child nightmares for weeks. You hold your breath and reach for your camera when your child spontaneously approaches another child, and you never worry about going the wrong way or having a full tank of gas, because your child will alert you to all of those details.
When you serve meals, they are inspected, smelled, and licked before ingestion. The idea of changing your child's daily routine gives you heart palpitations. Questions like, "When will I die?" are part of a normal, everyday conversation. Going to the doctor or the dentist is like preparing for war. You have no use for nail clippers, thank you, as your child's nails are miraculously kept low on their own.
I think Sherry needs glasses.
I'm showing my age for sure.
Just to go back to that one about questions like, when will I die? Funny story, my family and I went to Cartwright. It's an indoor water park last weekend. And pretty much about a half an hour of the whole ride there was my youngest one asking me, "So Mom, when I die, will you cry? Where will you bury me?" Well, what's the difference between being buried underground and in the wall? And this is his anxiety, right? I don't know if any of you experienced some of these too. And my husband was like, oh my gosh, can we change the subject? But again, something as simple as, well, not simple, but some of these questions that you're hearing, where are they coming from, right? It's the anxiety. Last two. Your child has post-traumatic stress disorder after Halloween, and they did not even go trick-or-treating. And last one, another telltale sign that you're parenting an anxious child, phrases like, come with me and stay with me are theme songs in your house. So there's 20 things every parent of an anxious child should know. Generalized anxiety disorder in children runs in families, okay? So there's a strong genetic component. If you're anxious, if your mom was anxious, grandma was anxious, there's a pretty strong genetic component there. Anxiety doesn't have to be caused by trauma. Most often it's not. Most often we have parents where their child was absolutely fine, happy-go-lucky, and then all of a sudden, something, the parent doesn't know what happened, but all of a sudden, all of these anxious behaviors start to surface. It doesn't have to be triggered by anything, right? Just like diabetes, they can develop it at any age. Your anxious children know that their fears are irrational. Anxiety grows bigger when children avoid anxiety. For those of you who were with us at our last presentation, avoidance is anxiety's delicious meal. That's what kids with anxiety do. They avoid what causes them the anxiety. Going to school, right? I don't know, being dropped off at a play date, swimming. Just think about all the things that your children are anxious about, and what do? They avoid it. Anxiety can make kids physically sick. All right, we'll talk about some of the physical anxiety symptoms later on in the presentation, like stomach aches, headaches, difficulty breathing. We'll talk a little bit about panic attacks if your children have panic attacks. And kids with anxiety are more likely to pull their hair out or pick scabs for no reason. Sherry?
I do want to say one thing about the physical aspects of anxiety. Sometimes as parents, we could, your child could come to you, or my children came to me when they were young and said, like, I'm not feeling well. I feel like my heart is racing. And 9 times out of 10, I'm like, you'll be okay. Just take a couple of deep breaths. You're probably just feeling anxious. But that being said, we don't ever want to fall in the trap of dismissing physical complaints, right? So if your child is saying on more than one occasion, you know what, I'm not feeling right, something doesn't feel right in my body, we always encourage all parents to take your child to the pediatrician. First of all, they have to have the assurance that medically they're fine, but it also validates their feelings as legitimate, and we want to make sure that we're sending the message, we hear you, we understand this is a worry, let's make sure that everything is fine, and then we can start another conversation.
So you can read it.
Oh, yep, thanks. When parents give in and let their anxious child avoid school continuously, they are more likely to be homeschooled eventually. Anxiety is cyclical and it can come and go over time, which I think is a really important thing to consider, because there are often times that parents will say to me, like, I thought the anxiety was over. Anxiety never really leaves. It just is managed and dealt with more effectively. So when there's periods of intense stress or a crisis occurs, you can see anxiety surface very quickly. So I think that we have to be patient with our anxious kids and be able to recognize that there are going to be times that they're going to stumble and fall. Our job is to be there to pick them up and to reflect and remind them of how they've been able to handle things effectively in the past. Children with anxiety tend to be more emotionally intelligent. Part of that is because they're also hypervigilant, right? The anxious child is constantly scanning the room, scanning the environment, scanning your face. You look worried, Mom, or is everything okay? So those are the kind of things that, as much as they're, it's a real strength, but sometimes it can also be a burden. Anxious kids tend to be better at reading social cues and body language. They spend much of their time thinking about the what ifs, like Rosa had mentioned. Kids with worries are more likely to have a harder time with change, right? Unpredictability for an anxious kid can really be difficult, right? If not at times damaging. Even in schools, when we're having a change in scheduling or programming, we always preview at the start of the day what the day is going to look like. It's going to be different. And all of that kind of scaffolding helps the kids to anticipate and prepare themselves for something that they're not accustomed to doing, right? Your anxious child wants to get rid of their anxiety more than you even know. Anxious kids are more likely to have heightened senses all the way around. Young children with anxiety are more likely to be picky eaters, and anxious children are less likely to face their fears if their parents don't encourage them to do so. So we're going to be talking about different roles that parents can take in dealing with an anxious child, but the encouragement and the coaching is a very important part.
So just finishing up, some more things every parent should know. Anxious children can have panic attacks in their sleep. They do not have to be triggered by stress. Intelligent kids can have worries that don't make sense, like a fear of sharks. Think about it. Have any of you swam in an ocean of sharks lately? No, but yet we know. We're afraid of them, okay? And anxious kids don't have to be a victim to their anxiety. With skills and tools, they can be empowered to crush their anxiety. So we have parents, right, that come to us almost every day. Anxiety can be very empowering and very confusing. So what we try to do is break down the different parenting styles for anxious children. And we're not saying that any one of them is wrong. All parents mean well, right? And you want to help your children. But sometimes the decisions we make actually exacerbate the anxiety instead of making it better, okay? So the first one is the parental bystander. So it says here, are you to be a bystander watching this beast overcome your child? Then there's the parental protector. We'll go into each one. Are you to pave the way so your child feels no bumps? This is a big one here. This is a big one. We're going to talk a lot about this, okay? And the parental coach, which is what we're going to try and train you today to be more like, okay? And are you to be a coach and train your child for every battle? Listen, if you can take anything away from this talk today, it's that you need to give your kids the tools and the skills, all right? It's not enough we want you to be empathetic, all right? And you'll find out that the parental bystander, woo, you're the most empathetic parents ever, okay? And what happens is you treat them like your other kids, right? Consequences. So if my child doesn't sleep, all right, well then I'm going to take a toy away. If my child refuses to go to school in the morning or gives me a hard time, okay, no iPad, no devices for a week. All right, so you have some things here that some parents have said to us over the years. He refuses to do things even when we threaten to take everything away. She just won't sleep. She's lazy and she doesn't want to go to school. So, like I said, there goes the discipline and the consequences. But what happens is, many times these parents have had anxiety themselves, and so they say things to us like, you know, I feel bad for them. I don't want them to get made fun of. I don't want them to go through what I did, or what I went through. It's just them being stubborn, you know? But in a sense, you're not validating your child's feelings, right? You're punishing them, and that's not going to make it any better. I promise you, it's not going to make it any better. All right?
So the parental protector, this is also very difficult to not fall into this kind of trap because it really is hard to see your child struggle, right? Particularly if you can relate because of your own childhood experience, or maybe you had a sibling that struggled with anxiety. So you want to jump in, right? And help them in any way you can, right? And we all want our kids to be happy, right? But sometimes getting to happiness is a struggle. And it doesn't always, it can't always be fixed tomorrow. It's a longer process. We try to cocoon them from the bumps of life and rid them from any anxiety-producing situations, right? So again, we kind of go back to the thinking that if we continue to allow them to avoid situations that produce anxiety for them, we don't build the internal constitution that they need and the strength that they need to be able to feel that they have confidence and competency in facing those fears, right?
So now we have two extremes, right? So you have, let's throw my child into the water without teaching them how to swim, right? So that was the bystander, right? And now we have the protector on the other side where you don't want to have anything, you don't want to upset your child, all right? Sometimes I get parents who call me, right? And they say things to me like, my child used to be in this group of friends, right? And now he or she is no longer in that group. And, she's feeling really anxious. And of course, I empathize. We've been there before, right? But what should we do? Is this life? Is this going to happen? This is going to happen. So what we can do is give our kids the tools to deal with it. There's going to be days after days where your child might say, you know what, Mom, I tried to join this group, but this group is already formed. So then I tried this group. Well, this is good, right? Your child is trying. Empower them, support them. Eventually they'll find their way. But trying to pave the road, trying to iron out all the bumps, you're doing more harm than good, because then they'll become less resilient in the long run. And when things like this come up, they can't handle it because they're so used to things just being great. All right, there's a good book up here, A Perfectly Messed Up Story. I would suggest it to some of you because it does talk about someone who's just walking along and things are great, right? And then all of this happens and this person totally stresses out. But then in the end realizes that it's okay and we learn from it.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
All right, and then we have the parental coach. Anxious kids will flourish when their parents take on the coaching role. I don't know if any of you guys have either been coaches yourself or have had your kids in sports teams, right? There's certain coach styles that are very, it's my way or the highway. And then there's other coaching styles that actually enlist the feedback and cooperation of the kids, right? And work with them as a team, because that's truly the way that they'll find the greatest success, right? So when you become your child's coach, again, you're not telling them exactly what to do. You're beginning a conversation with them that can be very simple, depending on how the age and kind of the developmental space that they're in, but it also depends on what the issues are, right? It's easier to coach certain things than others. But the whole idea and philosophy behind being a coach is really to empower your child to be involved and to encourage and be a cheerleader for them when they are really stepping into some very uncharted waters, right? Because we all would stay in our total comfort zone, but you know, the kind of the learning and the experience comes with the stretch. So those are the kind of things that we want to recognize and encourage. We celebrate victories and we pick them up when they're defeated. You can't fight the fight for them, but you can certainly be by their side. So again, just really reinforcing that you're hearing them, you understand, you see that it's a struggle, but you're there for them and we're going to figure it out together, right? And even the more, you know, the open conversations with, you know, brothers and sisters, so that they don't have to feel, if their brother doesn't feel anxious or have those experiences, they don't have to feel like, I don't want John to know. Don't tell, it's not a secret. Anxiety is not a dirty word. It's something that should be discussed, and the family as a unit can support any child that's really struggling in that regard.
So what you need to do is understand the anxiety. Understand your child's anxiety. You need to try and recognize those hidden symptoms. Okay? Anxiety is not always, I'm scared. It could be irritability, right? It can be oppositional, right? We talked about it at our last presentation. Are you in a good mood when you're anxious? No. So neither will your children. All right? Recognize the physical symptoms. And what are the anxiety themes? All right? So I'm introducing you to Carter, and I'm introducing you to Mandy. Carter has a hard time sleeping at night. Mom and Dad are having a really hard time having him sleep in his own bed. So they put him to bed, but then he wakes up at 1 or 2 a.m., and what does he do? He crawls into Mom and Dad's bed. And I have to be honest with you, I fall into this trap. Who wants to wake up at 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning and, you know, walk their child back to bed? You give in, right? You give in. Then there's Mandy. Mandy was fine up until middle school, happy-go-lucky. Then all of a sudden, she started having these anxious symptoms, having a hard time going to school. Someone threw up at school. So now she's having a hard time going to school because she has this fear that someone will throw up. Mom and Dad, she's experiencing physical symptoms. Mom and Dad take her to the doctor. They get all sorts of tests done. She comes back fine. Mom even comes during lunch to sit with her and have lunch with her. The days that Mom's not there, Mandy goes to the nurse's office. She spends more time in the nurse's office than in classes. Pretty soon, Mom and Dad are considering homeschooling her. Do you see how anxiety, if you don't give your kids the tools, do you understand how the anxiety can grow and grow and grow, where it's so out of control? So, the tools. What kind of tools can you give? Well, we'll talk about that. This is, I got this from calmthechaos.com. So I'm a big proponent going online. I find different parent websites and things. So I stumbled upon this. It's calmthechaos.com. And she talks about, this woman talks about having a child who was very anxious and was very oppositional and defiant. And she said all of her family members would say to her, you know, geez, don't you have control over your child? Basically, you need to do what I say and that's it. And she said she tried all of that and that really didn't work. So, you know, she says, out with the old, that's old news, guys. That's you know, old ways of disciplining our kids and raising our kids. And in with the new. And she says there's 3 things that you need to do. You need to connect with your child, understand, and empower. Okay? So connecting is critical to bringing you and your child together. The more you connect, the more likely your child will do what you want. All right? That's a little trick that us teachers do also in class. The more you connect with kids and they like you, the less likely they'll be to not listen to you. All right? And I gave you an example. Family game night. All right? That's a great example for you to connect with your kids. You can have all the connection you want with your kid, but if you don't understand the root cause of your child's behavior, it's going to keep popping up. Guys, you have to be detectives. You have to figure out what's causing it. What's at the root? Behavior is communication. Your child doesn't want to be oppositional. When you ask them, do you want French toast? And they say yes, and then all of a sudden you give them French toast and they're like, no, I don't want that, I wanted something else. They don't mean to give you a hard time. Decisions are overwhelming for anxious kids. All right? Once you find the true cause of the behavior, you can stop it and even prevent it from happening. And then empower. Okay? You and your child have to think of the solution together. You have to plan together. You need your child to have a buy-in. All right? You're not just throwing strategies, you know? Sometimes kids come into my office and I'm like, oh, so do you know any strategies on how to deal with anxiety? Yeah, count to 3, or take 3 deep breaths, count to 10, yeah, all right, but a lot of those don't work. And remember what we said at the last presentation, you have to change their thoughts first. All right, and we'll talk about that. All those other strategies are good, but we really need to change their thoughts, their negative thoughts, into positive ones.
And I just wanted to add in, like, anticipating, once you've done a lot of detective work and you've identified patterns, being able to anticipate and have a conversation with your kids about what might be a tough situation so that they know and can prepare themselves for meeting a different stressor in a different way, where they'll feel more confident. I'll often say, even to middle school kids, look, if there's a situation where you're really feeling stressed in class, you can ask for a break. You can tell the teacher that you just want to go and get a drink of water or use the bathroom and then come back. But while you're out there, try to kind of reframe your thinking around that incident and come back with more confidence. And that's, the only way that kind of anchors itself to the experience is with practice. So the more kids practice managing strong emotions, the better they get at it, right?
So calm the chaos. Also, some of you have this, right? It's the iceberg theory, right? And on the outside, right, the part that you see, that on the surface, it's about 15% of what your child is really experiencing. So what you can see on the outside, screaming, kicking, crying, meltdowns, running away, loud noises, right? But what could be hiding on the bottom, all right? And it gives you all sorts of different things that could be causing all of these behaviors. My personal favorite is the Carly Simon, Operation Carly Simon. Are you familiar with that song? You probably think the song is about you. So a lot of times, parents will come to us and say, my child is giving me such a hard time, okay? It's not about you, all right? If you take you away from it, out of it, like, my kid never listens to me, then maybe you could say, my child is having a hard time, and what is my child trying to tell me? Take yourself out of it, all right? Take Carly Simon out of this and try to rephrase it. And that's the first step to connecting and understanding with your kid. Does this make sense so far?
So behavior reboot. We've been talking a lot about uncovering the root or the cause of anxieties. Sometimes it's not so easy to do, and it takes a while to really appreciate and start monitoring patterns that might have gone unnoticed up until the point that you turned your attention and focus to it. So, as Rosa had said before, we want to find a solution that you and your child are excited about. Sounds easy, but it's often not. I've heard many, many times, that's not going to work. Why do you keep telling me that? And, you know, in some regards, they're right. If they don't feel that certain things are going to be helpful and work for them, then no matter how much we encourage and coach, it's just not going to generalize, right? Or, I only feel good when I'm in your office, but when I go outside and I have to deal with kids in a cafeteria, I still feel bad. Well, what can we do differently then as you approach the cafeteria to maybe shift your thinking or shift some of the ways that you're going to deal with some of the uncertainty around cafeteria time, right? Because the cafeteria can be a very scary place for a lot of kids. So those are the kinds of things that we want to identify and try to plan and problem solve around.
There's the Dr. Gottman research. So Dr. Gottman is a psychologist, and he did some research with married couples. And he found that during an argument, married couples had 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative one. So,
which I wasn't actually, I said I challenged that fact.
So, now try to apply this to our anxious children. In the course of a day, how many times are you saying to them, no, stop that, don't do that. Why did you do that? Okay, so those are all negatives. And we have here, who would you listen to? Someone who barks orders at you all the time, or someone who is more positive? So one of the things you can do, a lot of times we have parents that come to us and they say, well, our children are siblings. Their siblings are always fighting, right? And the arguments between the siblings cause them a lot of anxiety. And we find that one of the things we suggest is maybe each one of them has a little journal, and depending if they're young or they're older, and every day they can write something or draw something positive, a positive interaction they had with that sibling. And every day, maybe at the end of the day or at some point of the day, they could exchange their journals, or they can share the 1 positive or 2 positive experiences they had with that sibling. Okay? It works for siblings. It works for if, sometimes my husband says or does things that might make the anxiety in the house go a little higher. For some of my kids, I have 3. So I did this for one of my kids and my husband, and that helped improve their relationship. So you can do it with whoever is causing that anxiety with your child. I have to be honest with you, I've used it, it works.
And I think it's important, even as adults, that we recognize that we often remember the negatives more so than the positives, right? So we're just trying to, again, shift the perspective taking of your child as well as yourselves to recognize that, yes, there's times that are very problematic and challenging and frustrating and even disappointing. But there's also moments that are just almost go unrecognized, that are filled with joy and happiness. So I think we have to keep that in mind and make sure that we don't focus on always fixing, but also appreciating, a lot of the really good things that are going on a daily basis.
Okay, so we're ready for more strategies and tools to give our kids. The next one, we're fighting back. Okay, we need to teach our kids to fight back. The first thing we do is we name their anxiety. So this is one book that I read to the young ones. I'm in elementary school. It's Harry and the Terrible What's-It. He's afraid of his basement. He calls it a what's-it. All right? It's a great story about overcoming his anxiety. Help your anxious kids see their anxiety as an enemy that they're trying to defeat. This helps them externalize their anxiety. All right? And give it a name. I wrote dictator, worry bully. Oh geez, some of the names that the kids in my school, make for their and generate for their anxiety is quite interesting. But give it a name. Have them externalize it. Okay, it's not them that they need to defeat. It's this worry bully. Okay. Next, try to learn some anxiety tricks. Teach your kids how anxiety works. All right. So we talk about that this dictator likes to set off false alarms. All right, so kids are not too young to know about their sympathetic nervous system, right? That fight, flight, or freeze response. I teach it to kids as young as first grade, okay? I teach them that this dictator, right, tricks you, and it makes you think that there's an emergency going on, kind of like it turns on that emergency switch, right? And what we need to do is use tools to turn it off. I always talk about red thoughts and green thoughts. If any of your kids are at West Orchard, you're going to hear red thoughts and green thoughts. Red thoughts are those negative, anxious thoughts. And those green thoughts are those positive thoughts that we need to teach the kids to defeat those red thoughts, to crush those red thoughts. I know it sounds so like we're in battle, but it is. It's a fight. I have here, ask your kids what their dictator is telling them. What are the red thoughts being thrown their way? If they can't tell you, ask them when they're anxious. What is the worst thing that can happen? This will give you a window into their red thoughts. And then the third, develop their weapons. Tell your kids they have a choice to either invite their Worry Billy's red thoughts into their mind for a long chat, or they can fight back with their own green thoughts. Sometimes I even say, are you subscribing to the Worry Billy channel? You know, so these are just different things that I say to them to make it more concrete for them. If the Worry Billy tells them that they will throw up at school, they need to counteract it. So that's the red thought. You're going to throw up at school. Don't go to school. No, I think you have a stomach ache. Don't you have a stomach ache? Oh, you don't feel well. That's the red thought, right? And then the green thought is, I never have before. I've never thrown up before. So why am I going to throw up now? All right? Teach them the avoidance traps. Their dictator wants them to avoid. There goes that word again. Avoid, avoid, avoid. All right? The quickest way to shrink their dictator and make him quiet is to not avoid. They have to face their fears. And then try to empower the kids to face their anxiety and not avoid anxiety-producing situations. Yes?
What if the fear is legitimate? So you feel anxious about a situation in which you're going to have a problem or something might happen, and it's not completely a red light scenario. What's the situation? What do you do?
Do you want to answer?
Well, sure. I would, the first thing I would suggest is to try to tease that out, because if there's a real threat in your child's environment, then really somebody needs to be notified of that.
No, not threatening, but I'm concerned, say, I might not get along with X today, we've been fighting all the time, or, you know, math is really hard for me and his problems go to math class. When there's legitimacy.
Right,
to
okay.
anxiety.
So in those scenarios, what we often do, because we deal with this a lot, just like kind of in the moment during school, is to talk about resources that are available and supports that are available for them. Do some social scripting. We do that a lot for peer interactions. You know, so if you know, Lila said this, what could you say? Instead of just either shrinking or becoming defensive, then there's opportunities, again, to arm them with some more strategies, but also help them find words that make sense for them. A lot of the kids that I work with in middle school, particularly because the whole social context, it becomes much more sophisticated and the pace is just faster. I just say that, you know, it's okay to say, could you say that again? Or in your own mind say, you know what, maybe I should slow down before I respond to someone saying something to me. But it's really, really important that the kids know, particularly when they're in school, but also at home, that there's supports for them. That if they need help, they should ask for help. A lot of kids don't want to ask for help these days because they feel like that nobody else is struggling with this except for them. So you also want to dismiss that and dispel that whole idea that they are the only one that's having difficulty in middle school, or the only one that's having difficulty navigating the playground or the lunchroom, because those are just, it's just almost a developmental process, and they're growing pains. particularly when kids come into middle school and they might not have been paired with the same kids that they've either gone to Roaring Brook or West Orchard with, and they feel fractioned. That's very hard for them to adjust to initially in 5th grade. But we, as a school and a staff, just offer many opportunities for kids to build additional relationships, recognizing that it is something that they're not used to, but looking again through the glass half full instead of half empty, this is an opportunity to maybe meet and make new friends.
Another thing I would suggest is working with your child and giving them small challenges. So you can't expect them to do and face their fear all at once. So for example, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, is if they have a fear of the dark, or if they have a fear that someone might be nasty or might be mean to them, you can give them little challenges like, all right, well, for tomorrow, you might want to sit at the same table as them, but not sit right next to them, and see how they interact with the other kids. All right, she seemed okay, or he seemed fine. All right, tomorrow you might want to scooch over a little bit and see how that goes. So giving them little challenges. If they're afraid of the dark, okay, I'll wait at the bottom of the steps and I'll watch you go up the stairs and turn on the light. All right, so give them little challenges first, and then finally they'll be able to face whatever fear it is. Yes?
You mentioned about the dictator, calling the science the dictator, but what about how do you approach the conversation with middle schoolers or teenagers?
Likewise, I think that, labeling and helping them understand, maybe using a more sophisticated, language, or even dictator. The kids relate to that. Somebody pushing them around, making them feel less than, making them feel not confident. Those are all, the different things. But it's more important to find out for your child what their experience is. Are they becoming overwhelmed? Are they having the negative thoughts that reflect that they don't have the skills or the strength to be able to face these challenging scenarios? But so whatever they decide through that conversation, they can label it themselves. You can help them create a label for it. Because although I'm actually surprised that elementary kids understand dictator, but the worry bully for sure.
Right, dictator is more for the older kids, yeah.
It's a little bit more sophisticated. Okay, so, anxiety shows itself in a lot of very different ways, and I'd not say all, but mostly fear-based, right? So worries about missing things, worries about time. I'm not going to have enough time. How long will it take till we get there? When will we be back home? How much time do I have to do certain things, right? And I, myself, as my children are grown now, but when they were younger, my oldest daughter, who was just a very serious student, my boys not so much, but that's a different story. She would always say, like, am I going to have enough time to do my homework? And I'm like, you'll definitely have enough time to do your homework. No, I don't think I'm going to have enough time. So those are the kind of things that you want to, give them security and understanding that they can do the homework, but also be realistic with them. Well, how much homework do you have? What is it in? How long do you think it's supposed to really take to do? Because some children that are anxious can sit in front with one assignment and it could be an hour later and they haven't done the work that they needed to do. So also framing again that there's estimates and there's time limits to everything. I could spend my whole day cleaning my house, or I could do, say prioritize 3 things and say, you know what, by 12 o'clock, whatever it's going to get done, it's got to get done. You know what I mean? So those are certain things around time. Rosie, you're going to have to read that.
Yes. So I put a lot of information on these slides because I'm not quite sure how you are, but I know when I go to conferences or workshops, I often forget what they say. So I figured, what we're saying, you have all the tools and strategies, so I apologize that they're chock full of information, but at least you'll remember, and you have a reference when you go back. So my daughter is in middle school, so when she gets home, the first thing I hear is, oh my gosh, I have so much homework, and like she like slouches down in the chair, it's like, oh, and like, so for about 30 minutes, she will pace and even sometimes go on her phone, right? And she's stressing about all of this homework that she has, but she hasn't started. Right? So it's taking her, for the anxious child, they don't realize that it's actually taking them longer, right? So one of the things that Sherry just mentioned is ask them to write out what they need to do. You can also assign how much time each task will take. And then when teens write down everything they have to do and how long it will take, they see that the activity, that they actually have more time than they initially thought. You can even use a large planner to break out their assignments into bite-sized pieces, not bite-sized, bite-sized pieces throughout the week. If they have to read a book, they can read one chapter a night. When it's reframed in that way, it doesn't seem as overwhelming for, I would say her, for my daughter and for your kids, okay? Let your child know what is happening next. For little ones, structure and routine reduces anxiety. You know sudden changes may throw your anxious children into a tailspin. If your kids learn how to manage their time by using a calendar or planner, they will have the tools to reduce their own anxiety level. And setting time limits can ironically help kids who worry about time. Guys, here it goes again, the devices, okay? Before I put time limits on my 2 boys, every morning it would be that they were on their devices. They would get up in the morning, they wouldn't get ready, they wouldn't brush their teeth. I would call them, call their names a million times, they wouldn't get dressed because they were on their devices. So then I had a rule and I said, no devices, okay? It helped, but yes, they freaked out. So then I compromised with them and I said, if you get ready, if you brush your teeth, you eat your breakfast and you're all dressed, then you can have your iPad. But guys, you have to show them and we have to tell the kids, we have to help them understand and work with time management, right? We are their models for them, so we need to impose these limits, all right? Oh, and then the fourth one we put in there is hang in there. We could do it. We need to give them the skills to organize their life and plan out their responsibilities.
And one thing I do want to say about time management, because I was never really a very good time person. My husband's very good with the time, so we made a good match. But one of the things, as Rosa said, is by leading by example. Even if you're not a great time manager, but you can say to your son or daughter, you know what, I've had trouble with time. It's okay. These are the ways that I've overcome it. Because we want them to also understand that, again, it's a more generalized experience. They're not the only ones struggling with time. It's important to also share authentically, right? If you have something that you can identify, you can share with them. When you were younger, you had these same concerns and worries, but now you're a grown-up and you're successful and you have a job. And because a lot of kids catastrophize their thinking and they think, I'm never going to be able to be a successful grown-up or a successful adult. I won't be able to have the job I want because I'm crippled by my anxieties and my worries. So we have to, again, educate them so that they're viewing their experiences through a different lens.
Okay, so panic attacks. This is something else that children may experience. They're physiological occurrences that can happen to people who suffer from anxiety. They could come on suddenly and without warning. Typically, panic attacks can last 10 to 15 minutes, but it's the fear of having another one that is most debilitating. And they can even happen during your sleep. All right, so those are some common symptoms that we have there. Racing heart, feeling dizzy, difficulty breathing, swallowing, trembling.
And so some of this is repetitive, so we won't belabor the conversation, but again, educate them about the signs and symptoms of a panic attack. I was actually volunteering in our town's art show a couple of weeks ago, and there was a woman that came to the front of the art show, and she was having a panic attack. And so, you know, I just happened to be volunteering in the front, and so I put her in a chair in the shade, and I went through this whole coaching experience with her about remembering that she's going to be able to get through this panic attack. She knows what it is. They've happened before, and she survived them. You know, it didn't completely eradicate the feeling in the sense, but there was just a greater sense of calmness and that self-control, right? Because one of the things with panic attacks is children, and as well as adults, feel totally out of control. Their body is basically like haywire, everything's short-circuiting, and they can't figure out how to right the ship. So, you know, being able to identify the signs, making a list of what has been helpful in the past, distracting yourself or your child, right? So that they're not caught up in that rumination. A lot of anxiety gets its strength by the repetitiveness of the thinking, right? They perseverate, they ruminate, and they can't get through it. Physical techniques. I've given kids at my school ice packs for their wrists, a cool, like a splash of water on the face, things that they can, again, physiologically, can kind of shift the balance so that they can feel more in control. Thought techniques, right? Not allowing anxiety and panic to catastrophize our lives. Because a lot of kids will say to me, I'm never going to get better. So you have to be there as their kind of cheerleader saying, yes, you will get better. It doesn't feel like that now, but we know that you've been able to survive these moments. And empowering them, of course.
Yeah, and having them say things like, you know, my panic attacks will always end. I'm not dying, because some of them think that they're dying. You know, they always end, all right? That's something empowering and positive they can say to themselves.
Right. Or I feel terrible now.
Yes.
But earlier today, I felt good. Or I know when I go home, I'm going to feel better. So we want to just kind of continue to focus and shift their attention again from, you know, things are never going to get better to me, to this is a moment that we're going to have to ride out, but it will pass.
And something you can say to them, if you're with them during a panic attack, is, I know you don't feel good right now. I know this is very uncomfortable, but I will be right here with you, okay? That's the best thing that you can do for them. Not to freak out alongside, right? But just be calm, and it'll be over.
So Rosa just had put up some distracting techniques, which, you know, are, even as adults, you know, when we're having a bad day or something's really bothering us and we want to kind of shake the mood, there's things that you can do. You can watch a favorite show. You could look at a video or a picture on your phone. Text a friend just for a random conversation. Look at an Instagram. I don't do social media, but I guess that's a current. Again, I think I'm telling my age. Play I Spy around the room. I used to, when my kids were small and we had to take a long travel, that I Spy was the best game ever because it reduced the focus on the time, but it also got them much more observant of their environment and what was happening. And then talk about a fun event that's coming up. That's something that they can look forward to, that they know about, that maybe they're even involved in the planning. My kids, when I have a party at the house, I say, like, what kind of food do you want to make? Who do you want to invite? What do you want a theme to be if we're doing something like that? So just, again, a much more kind of collaborative and a group experience that builds kids up.
I just thought I'd share a technique that I've had experience with that was helpful that somebody shared with me. It's the 5-finger technique. So you kind of go through the 5 senses. So in the moment of panic, if you say, okay, tell me 5 things you could touch right now. Tell me 4 things you could see. Tell me 3 things you could hear. So you go through the senses and you go down, and by the time you get to the end, you know, 1 thing you could taste or something that's left over from, you know, whatever it is. By the time you get to the end, sometimes it's just a calmer experience.
Yep, it's called the grounding technique.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
You're right. Thank you for sharing.
And then the physical. Exercise for mental health is just essential, right? Staying active, sometimes, again, breaking that physiological and that neurological cross-wiring or malfiring, jumping jacks, jogging, biking, punching a bag. You know, if your kid's upset, they can punch their pillow. Playing on the trampoline, taking a walk outside, the ice pack for your face, taking a shower or bath. Things, again, that we're just trying to shift the circuitry so the kids can feel like that their ship is being righted.
Again, these are just some empowering thoughts we had talked about earlier. Okay? You don't need to go through them. We talked about them. So here are some,
Yep, there's, yeah.
so there goes some of the coping skills, right? Some calming skills, deep breaths. There goes that grounding technique like Liz just shared. Think of your favorite place. So we don't have to go through all of them. Some distracting techniques, physical, and processing. Okay? Anybody have any questions about these?
Journaling has actually been, at least in my experience, very successful, particularly at the middle school. If you have a student that hates to write, obviously you're not going to choose journaling as an outlet. But kids have kept journals in my office, and like when they're coming to and they're having a tough day or a good day, they'll come and write down that experience. So when they are having a tough day, they can remember the good days. Because again, you know what, with anxiety and overall mood, your view gets very shadowed, right? You think everything is, you know, not good, and I'm never going to be, again, all those negative statements. So we have to just have a way to anchor the kids and to get them feeling comfortable moving forward.
How to stop the world from crushing your sensitive child. So I don't know how many of you have sensitive children. Are your children usually the helper on the playground? Usually the first one to notice when other kids are crying? Very kind-hearted, goes out of his or her way to make sure everyone's happy. Crushed when someone is mean to them, right? Or if the whole group is in trouble, right? Your child is the one that's crying, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble, and takes it all on him or her. So there's some things that you can do to help your sensitive child. The first thing is perspective. Having conversations with your children that unfortunately there's going to be some kids that might be mean to them. But the world is really full of thoughtful people, and some kids can be cruel. And you could be the nicest person on this planet, but some mean kids are going to find it fun to be cruel to you. All right? I know that sounds, as I was typing this on the PowerPoint slide, it's true. And if you have a sensitive youngster, you need to have these conversations with them. They can be target for bullies. They're vulnerable. Okay? So it's just something that you need to be aware of. Sensitive children often think that everything is directed at them, right? I have the example when the teacher has scolded the class, they feel like they're being personally attacked. So maybe they need to learn the difference between a tone and a shout. How many of you have talked to them with maybe a little bit of a tone, and your child's like, stop screaming at me? My kids do this all the time. So maybe they need to learn the difference between firmness and yelling. And try to avoid watching upsetting TV and video games. All right, because sensitive kids have some memory. They remember a lot, and especially something that is negative. Wait, did I skip one? No, right? Okay.
Play upstairs.
No.
Where are we?
Nighttime fears.
All right. I'm going to let you take that. 'Cause
Okay.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to read it.
So now let's shift to nighttime fears. We're trying to, we don't know what your children's fears and anxieties are, so we're trying to fit as much as we can into this presentation. Hopefully, we can address some of why you came here today. So if some of your children are having nighttime fears, We need to find out what scares them and makes them scared of sleeping. For one of my sons, it was the fear of someone coming into the room and killing him, okay? And so what we talked about, you know, what's scaring you, what's going on. He thought his room is all the way at the top floor, and he thought that someone would take a ladder and climb up, like, you know, and then go through his window. So what I did is I got the ladder, right? My husband's an electrician, so he's got lots of ladders. So we got a ladder, and I showed him that his room is higher than the ladder can even reach, and it was a big, huge, long extension ladder. And we showed him that it's not possible. You're safe. We talked about having alarms in the car. We talked about on the house. We talked about being in a safe community. We had all of this discussion. We also set up their room for optimal success, and I'm not talking about decorating their room with like a huge car decal or you know, lava lamps. That's not what we mean about setting their room up for success. What we mean is sit down with your child in the dark room, all right, and figure out, ask them what are the areas of the room that's scaring them. All right, remove toys and shadows that transform into the creepy monsters when the lights go out. Ask them what areas they're afraid of the most. Under the bed, the closet, give them a flashlight. Stick it on the bottom of their bed if they want. Ask them if they prefer the closet door open or closed. Are they afraid of the window? Show them that the window is locked. Oh, that was another thing I did. I showed them that the window was locked. Ask them if they prefer the blinds open or closed. All right, so you can decorate it as, it could be the best room on Pottery Barn Kids or Teen, but if it's not, if you don't do those bottom parts and really brainstorm with them, it's not going to work. They're still going to be afraid. Oh, these are some helpful suggestions. So these are just some things. I'm not endorsing this. I'm not telling you to go out and buy these things. These were just some helpful things that are on Amazon. There's some dimmable lamp color changing with remote control. It's pretty cool. I put the price on it. I don't know. There's a sound screen. You could play soft music. The one thing that works for my children is guided imagery. I don't buy anything. They're in bed, and I get the iPad or the phone, and I type in guided imagery for kids, and there's a whole bunch of free ones that go on, and they happen to be people with English accents, so it's so soothing. I've tried it with some kids at my school, right, for the kids that I work with. Some of them think it's a creepy voice. So you have to find the one that works for your children, but they go right out. And I go right out. I have to be honest with you. When I'm having a stressful day, I put it on. They even have it for adults. So that really works. This is the most important for those of you who still have kids that are sleeping in your bed. Okay? Do not lie down with them or have them sleep in your bed, because you're sending the message that they're not safe unless you're with them. It's very important not to be having them sleep in your bed, because once you start, it's going to be very difficult to get them out. Okay? Thanks. We're good. We're till 11:30, right?
Yes, I can. You can scoot over. You want to talk about this?
The break tent. Do you want to talk about it?
So,
Sherry likes the break tent. I think she wants one for her house.
I don't know about the space, but so creating a break tent. Again, this is just an opportunity to give your child a safe, warm, and comfortable place that if they really need a break, they feel like they can go to. You know, it doesn't necessarily need to be a tent. It could be a special place in their room. It could be a special place in the house. But again, we're just trying to help them identify places that make them feel comfortable, make them feel more secure, so in those moments of vulnerability, they get built back up from that experience. And it's a little bit like yoga, right? Did you ever hear of muscle memory with yoga? Same kind of thing with your emotional system, right? The more you can remind yourself of successes, the better you'll feel. But this is just a kind of a fun thing for younger kids, right? It helps them self-regulate, think they're contained in the tent. They can find, you know, perfect place or space in your house, even in your closet. Some kids like to go in their closets and like kind of like tuck themselves in. Make it very cozy. My kids used to make forts all the time and bring pillows and their favorite stuffed animals. And then you can also help them decide what do they want in their tent? Do they want a light? Do they want headphones? Do they want aroma spray?
Aroma spray. Well, I'm trying to think of all things that would, you know, help them
Squishy
relax.
balls, stuffed animals, and other kind of sensory squishy toys. So lessons our anxious kids will teach us that our fears are not always their fears. That our words can carry them down or lift them up. And that our kids are watching us all the time.
So separation anxiety, okay? Isn't it interesting all the forms of anxiety there are, right? There's so many more. You could be here all day. This is separation anxiety. For those of you who have children that have a really hard time separating from you, whether it's drop-off, play dates, birthday parties, even in your own home, right? In my family, sometimes going to the bathroom or taking a shower was a family affair, all right? I used to shut the door, and if they could like suck their bodies underneath the door to come back up, they would, you know, and you would see like their little fingers under the door, and it would break your heart, right? But this is all separation anxiety. Here's some things that you can do. Play games that encourage age-healthy separation. Hide and go seek, right? We've got scavenger hunts around the house. Walkie-talkie fun, okay? You give your child a walkie-talkie, I have the other one, go, you know, go somewhere far, and that is a great way to help support that. Set up activities for your child in the room right next to you. Tell your children when you're leaving the room they are in. It's not okay. I know some parents are like, okay, I'm just going to sneak out. All right, that causes more anxiety. Do not cave and bring them into the toilet with you. That was me for a while. All right? And don't sneak out when leaving them with others.
So, selective mutism. This is also, it's a more, I think, obvious form of anxiety, simply from the lack of communication. So people have said, you know, explain their daughter or son's mutism by saying she's just shy, she's overwhelmed, she's going to grow out of it, she'll adapt, she'll be fine when she gets older. But it is an anxiety disorder, and it does know age limits. The child might have selective mutism if they consistently don't speak in certain situations where they're expected to speak, even though there's nothing wrong with their ability to speak or communicate in their home language. And it's been happening for over a month, and it's beyond a reaction to just new situations. So if you find your son or daughter, or if you know a friend that their younger child ends up simply not speaking, and that maintains itself for more than, you know, any given situation, then it definitely needs professional attention. It's not something that just simply goes away.
So how is it treated? Cognitive behavior therapy, right? Remember what we said, changing your thoughts, right? If you change the thoughts, it will help change the behavior. Try not to shame your child for not talking. Don't beat your kids up for not speaking. Like, why won't you say anything? Why don't you just go over to your kid, you know, to those groups of kids and say hello? Why don't you say hi to grandma or to whatever, your aunt? There's a couple of good books, Maya's Voice, Lola's Words, and Leo's Words. Those are 3 good books if any of you are dealing with this. Try not to put your child on the spot. Slow and steady wins the race. Try to set up one-to-one interactions. So children with selective mutism have irrational rules. So their rules are more like, I don't speak to adults. I don't speak to these kids in front of those adults. I don't speak to kids. I don't speak to kids in school. I only speak to kids out on the playground. So they make up these irrational rules. There's no rhyme or reason for it. So trying to set up one-to-one interactions will be more successful. And be creative with communication. We have certain children in my school that have selective mutism, and it's hard to assess them, right? It's hard to have conversations, especially if you're a teacher. We have recordings. The child might record themselves at home and play it for the teacher later on.
So I think we should skip ahead.
Want to skip ahead?
Yeah, because
Okay.
I'm just mindful of time, and I know that people are going to probably need to start moving out. We just wanted to, there's a bunch of other slides in the presentation, the copies. So if there's questions, we can certainly answer them at the end, but we wanted to go to Ruben.
Don't we have till 11:30?
Yeah, but it's already 11 and people are going to start leaving.
Okay.
I mean, am I realistic about that, right? That people have stuff to do that we should,
We can still keep going. It's up to you. Yeah, we'll book till 11:30.
But are we going to be able to get to
Okay, fine, that's fine. There's anxiety or ADHD. Do you want, yes? Yes? Okay, so one parent wants, and then we'll, okay.
Sure.
So, anxiety or ADHD. There are some overlap between signs of ADHD and anxiety. Many of the symptoms that will get you a guaranteed diagnosis of ADHD are behaviors anxious kids have as well. Some kids look like they have ADHD when in fact it purely is anxiety. These kids are often misdiagnosed with ADHD, and that could be a dangerous mistake, especially with ADHD. Some kids are prescribed stimulants, and the stimulants can make the anxiety much worse. Okay? When anxious kids are nervous, they act hyper. When anxious kids are consumed with worry, they can be unfocused. When anxious kids are overwhelmed, they can look disorganized. And when anxious kids are nervous, they often fidget. So it often looks like ADHD. So what could you do? Well, ask yourself these questions if you're concerned that your child may be misdiagnosed. When your kids are hyper, is it right before or after something that made them nervous? Before or after school, before an activity, before bedtime? Try to figure out what makes them nervous, and if you see it, mostly before or after that. When your kids are unfocused, are they daydreaming about Minecraft and Legos, or are they battling worries? And when your kids are disorganized, are they incapable of organization, or are they feeling overwhelmed? And when your child fidgets, are they bored or are they nervous? Okay, so these are some good questions you can ask yourself, and then of course go and see your physician.
And I will say just one thing about ADHD and anxiety. The differential diagnosis is really important because we want to make sure what we're treating is accurate and exemplifies what's happening. There is many times that anxiety and ADHD can be a comorbid condition, and they have to be addressed not only individually but also in combination. So that's why it's really important to speak to your pediatrician, to even, seek out a psychiatrist if that's something that your pediatrician would recommend, because leaving those one addressed and one not addressed, it can be, first of all, it can be very confusing and distressing to the child, but it also helps us understand, particularly at the school level, what strategies we should really start, implementing and what areas we should start targeting. Because the executive functioning piece around ADHD is something that we see a lot in the schools that's very problematic for kids to manage. But executive functioning can also be born out of anxiety. So we have to be able to figure out which is which and help kids, again, feel empowered with different strategies of how to approach things so they don't feel as disabled by those pieces.
So we wanted to end with, dear mom and dad, it's me, your anxious kid. I'm not trying to be difficult, and I'm not a bad kid, but sometimes things just get overwhelming. Food is scary, you know. I get upset when I think the food is nice and smooth and then my tongue finds lumps. Sometimes this makes me want to throw up or gag. Sometimes food has a strong taste and I get overwhelmed. To be safe, I just try to stick with foods that I have already seen and tasted. Dear Mom and Dad, like in the mornings when you ask me if I want waffles or pancakes, waffles sound good, but when I see them, I know I definitely made the wrong choice. And I cry and I say I wanted pancakes. Decisions are hard for me, and I'm afraid I might make the wrong choice. Sometimes I might go back and forth with what I want and confuse us both. Dear Mom and Dad, I'd like to know where you are. I follow you everywhere. When you leave the room, I get scared because I don't feel safe. I know when you're with me, you'll keep me safe. Sometimes I don't play because I want to make sure I know where you are going. I hate it when you go to the bathroom. This is mine. And don't let me in. Only my little fingers can get under the door. I wish I could squish my whole self under. I stay very close to you, so you don't have time to disappear now.
Oh,
Did you want to talk a little bit about Ruler?
yeah. So Ruler is a new initiative in the district. So as many of you know, the district has a strategic plan to support and develop the emotional and social well-being of our students across from K to 12. Mark Brackett, if you've had an opportunity to see him speak, he's a psychologist out of Yale. He's actually coming here on October 21st at 7 o'clock at Greeley, right? Okay. He's incredibly entertaining, and he's very passionate about Ruler. He did a tremendous amount of research during his tenure at Yale, and he found out that when he polled 22,000 undergraduate students, how they were feeling, 75% of the kids, no matter whether they were great students or not so great students, but 75% of those students said that they responded with a negative emotion. Students reported being stressed 80% of their time on any given school day. We take this very seriously because we see that even within our own schools, kids are stressed out. There's a lot of demands. There's high expectations for the education in this district, and we have to find a better balance. Just go back 1 second.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Emotions, as we know, right? They affect our availability for learning. They affect our decision making. As you know, if you are just upset and angry and frustrated, do you make the best decisions? No, right? It impacts our creativity, it impacts our social relationships, it even impacts our ability to attend, right? If we have other emotions that are negatively impacting us on any given day, our memory is compromised, our physical and mental health is sacrificed, and our everyday effectiveness is reduced. So the vision of Ruler, and the reason why we brought this into the district, is the understanding that by increasing the emotional intelligence of our school communities, we believe that we will improve our ability to teach and learn, increase our students' engagement and their performance, encourage better quality relationships, decrease discipline referrals, and reduce the stress and anxiety that our students experience. Ruler as an acronym is based on recognizing the emotions in yourself and others, understanding the causes and consequences of emotions, labeling emotions accurately. You know, you might say to your son or daughter, "How was your day?" "Good." What does that mean? "How was your day?" "Bad." What does that mean? So we want to be able to start increasing the emotional language that our kids have access to, as well as that we communicate with them around. We also, part of the Ruler experience is expressing emotions appropriately. Kids are going to have very bad days, and they're going to have very good days. But when they have bad days, how is that expressed? As I tell all my middle schoolers when I first meet them as 5th graders, that my job is to make their stress manageable. I cannot promise stress-free days. It's just not life. Life is stressful. But the most important thing is that we feel like we can manage it and that we can work through, and that there's a lot of resources and supports available. And then regulating our emotions effectively. Even on those bad days, how am I going to get through school? Even on those bad days, how am I going to get myself to my soccer game? So those are kind of the fundamental premises of Ruler, but I wanted to kind of insert that as part of this conversation because I wanted everyone to know that this is an initiative taken by the board, but scripted so because we believe that there has to be a better balance for all kids, particularly in our district, to achieve academic excellence, but also to maintain their social and emotional well-being. Thanks.
Does
So-
anybody have any questions?
Do you think we can close with the meditation, or are we done?
Do you know, is there going to be a registration or anything for the Greeley with Dr.?
The presentation, that's through the PTA, I believe?
There'll be signs on the website. I think it'll be very well publicized. It's Monday, October 21st, and it's at 6:30.
Oh, 6:30. Okay, sorry.
6:30 to 9, so it's a little bit longer. He'll speak, and then there'll be panel
Like breakout?
breakout sessions for different topics. So I don't know what the registration will look like,
But there'll be.
I don't think you'll be able to miss it. Like you get a newsletter of any kind.
Yeah. Thank you.
You have a question?
So I have to talk a little bit about your sensitive child, right? And so, do you have any kind of tips or just, so in terms of, you brought it up in terms of like, a teacher is yelling at me, right? Not me, but it's a class, right? And so, you can rationalize, you can talk, you can explain, right? But I'm not really sure just a conversation, right? It's really being comprehended, right? So, other than trying to explain, or not yelling at you, you don't need to be perfect, it's, it is a class. Right? Is there really much you can do besides try to explain as much as you can and then just kind of throw them in and try to experience it for themselves, right? Like, I don't know if there's really anything else.
So if you have, if you have more than one child, you can certainly practice. So if, something is going on and all of your children are in trouble, you could certainly see how your child reacts and try to address it and talk to him during that moment. As I said earlier, you can practice, the firm voice versus yelling to distinguish those two. I'm trying to think of what else that you could do. A lot of times there is that perfectionistic quality also that's there that you alluded to. And just talking about that because sometimes that child is in trouble as well, did something wrong with the others, so it's not just like they're innocent and they're the only innocent one in that group. So talking about that it's okay to make mistakes. Talking about Edison, didn't Thomas Edison do like 1,000 tries before he found the light bulb? So talking about having those conversations will be helpful as well. But yes, it's a lot of talking and a lot of modeling, a lot of being patient, a lot of being supportive, but also giving them the tools. And you might even say to that child, okay, I'm going to give you a little mini challenge. Remember, the next time this happens and you feel like you want to cry, or you have those red thoughts that says, what did I do? This is all my fault. You're going to battle that worry bully, and you're going to replace it with, and then you and your child think about that one green thought. So give them that, so give him or her that mini challenge. Does that make sense?
I also think that it's important to get gather more information. So if your child had that experience, say either during school or at Girl Scouts, or to reach out to the teacher or reach out to the person that's running the activity and just say, look, I'm just trying to get more information. It doesn't have to be accusatory, but I was wondering if something happened yesterday at school with the class, because my son or daughter came home and said that they felt like maybe they were in trouble. Because it's really good to also get kind of both perspectives and some clarity around the children's reporting. It's not that they don't want to be accurate, but through their eyes, it could be a little bit, just one step off. So it's important also, though, to kind of be able to say, look, I spoke to Mrs. Smith, and she did say yesterday was a difficult day, because we want to also, right, we want to validate that whatever they're experiencing is true to them. But, this is kind of through her eyes, this is the way she saw it, and then be able to have another conversation in regards to that.
Any other questions? There's some books up here. You're welcome to take a look.
Look at me. I'm going to
Thank
try
you
to see
so
if we
much
can
for
do
coming.
the meditation.
You want to take a